Imagine walking into your own home and finding handcuffs and a camera, remnants of a betrayal you never saw coming. Jake didn't just find out, he took action. A story of revenge, shattered love, and a decision that will leave you questioning what you'd do in his shoes. Jake stepped into his country home late Wednesday morning, feeling the familiar scent of the place hit him. He hadn't set foot inside since Sunday, and all he wanted now was to grab a few things and be on his way. He figured his wife, Sarah, would be at work by now. Heading into the kitchen to make himself a cup of coffee, his eyes landed on the handcuffs and strip of duct tape still lying exactly where he'd left them on the table. The kitchen towel he had thrown on the floor after wiping his face was still in the same spot. The video camera was still perched on the tripod next to the table, and the chair he had smashed and knocked over remained on the ground, untouched. Instead of bothering with coffee, he went to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of Diet Coke. "Where the hell have you been?" Sarah's angry voice came from behind as she stormed into the kitchen. Jake ignored her, didn't even glance her way, and walked past her straight to the bedroom to collect some clothes. But she wasn't about to let him go so easily. She grabbed his arm. "I asked you a question," she snapped, her tone seething. Jake halted and turned to face her. This was the woman he'd been married to for 7 years, the woman he'd once loved deeply, but now, the same woman who had crushed him. "Let me go," he replied quietly. Sarah studied his face. His expression was vacant, his eyes dull and lifeless. Slowly, she released his arm, allowing him to pass. She then picked up the handcuffs, duct tape, and kitchen towel, walking over to the trash can to throw them away without a second thought. Moving to the tripod, she unscrewed the mounting bracket, placed the camcorder on the table, then folded the tripod and set it aside. Next, Sarah went to the bedroom. Jake had a large suitcase sprawled open on the bed, methodically packing clothes into it. "What are you doing, Jake?" she demanded. "I'm packing," he said flatly, continuing with the task. "Another business trip," she sneered. "No. Then where do you think you're going?" He stopped what he was doing and turned to look at her. His face remained disturbingly blank. "Does it really matter? You're my husband. I have a right to know," she shot back. "Sarah, you gave up that right last Sunday afternoon." He stuffed a few more items into the suitcase, zipped it up, and carried it out to the living room, setting it down by the door. Then he headed to his study, with Sarah trailing close behind. He collected a few papers from the desk and tucked them into his briefcase, then packed his laptop and charger into its bag. Jake returned to the kitchen table and picked up the video camera. Flipping it open, he checked that the SD card was still inside. "This is what you recorded on Sunday, right?" Sarah smirked. "A little keepsake of your payback. That's very thoughtful. Thank you." Jake remained silent, his expression unmoved. "Jake, for God's sake, talk to me," she yelled, her frustration bubbling over. Jake finally looked at her, his face reddening with a mix of emotions. "What did I do to deserve this? Why are you leaving?" she asked, her voice quivering. "Sarah, sit down at the table with me," he instructed, opening his computer bag and pulling out his laptop. He sat down in front of it, gesturing for her to take a seat as well. Once she was settled, he inserted the SD card into the laptop. "Let's watch this first. Then we'll have our conversation." He pressed play. The screen showed a chair shoved away from the kitchen table on the right, leaving an empty table space on the left. "Welcome home, sweetheart. Come on into the kitchen. I've got a little surprise for you, just like I promised on the phone." Jake appeared on the screen, beaming. Sarah walked up to him, clad in a short, sheer robe. Her hair and makeup were perfect, and she was barefoot. She held the handcuffs in one hand, grinning. "Sit down in the chair." Jake sat down, still smiling up at her. Sarah stepped behind him, crouching to cuff his wrists. Her robe fell open, revealing she wore nothing underneath. She looped one wrist into the cuff, passed the chain through the back of the chair, and fastened his other wrist. Leaving the frame briefly, she returned and covered his mouth with a strip of duct tape. Jake's smile was visible even with the tape on. Sarah then stood before him, letting her robe slide to the floor. Jake's eyes widened, lighting up at the sight in front of him. "Are you ready for your surprise?" she asked, a smile spreading across her face. Jake nodded in response. "We're all set here," she called out. Moments later, the sound of footsteps approached. Jake turned his head toward the noise. A man wearing Jake's robe walked into the room. The smile on Jake's face instantly vanished, replaced by sheer shock. "Sweetheart, you remember Joey from my job, don't you?" Sarah sauntered over to Joey and untied the belt of the robe, sliding it off his shoulders and tossing it right into Jake's lap. Joey stood there completely naked beneath the robe. Jake paused the video and looked directly at Sarah. "Why?" he asked, his voice flat. "You know exactly why, Sarah." "I have no idea what the hell you're talking about," she snapped back. Jake kept his composure, his face betraying nothing. "Before we tied the knot, I warned you I'd do it." His words left her confused. "You're not making any sense. What are you even talking about? I made it clear before we got married, if you ever cheated on me, I'd get back at you by sleeping with someone else right in front of your eyes. Remember that, don't you?" he said. "Is that what this is about? Your revenge?" she scoffed. "I promised, and now I've followed through," she replied nonchalantly, as if the incident meant nothing. "You actually think I cheated on you?" he questioned. "I know you did," she spat back. "All right, fine. Humor me, Sarah. When, exactly, did I cheat on you?" he demanded. "Don't pull that innocent act on me. You know damn well when, where, and who it was with," she retorted furiously. Jake removed the SD card from the camera, placed it into his bag, and closed the laptop. He turned to face her, his expression finally cracking to show his anger. "Either you tell me what the hell you're talking about, or I'm walking out that door right now," he snapped. "Fine, play dumb all you want. While you were off on this so-called business trip last week, I got a call from Jill, Jerry's wife. She told me you and Jerry spent the entire week fooling around with a couple of __. Jill said that? And what proof did she offer?" he shot back. "Cut the poor victim crap, Jake. You know exactly what you did," she yelled. "So, you decided to sleep with Joey right in front of me, all because of a phone call from someone you supposedly trust," he replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "Yeah, I did it," she admitted without hesitation. "Just based on her word? No actual proof at all?" he pressed. "I didn't need any," she replied defiantly. "Sarah, you handcuffed me, paraded a man in front of me, and humiliated me, all because of something you heard. You call that payback?" Jake shook his head, still bewildered. "You never confronted me, never talked to me about it. You just decided I was guilty and went ahead with your little revenge plan, without a shred of evidence." "Yes," she said firmly. "So now we're even, is that it?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Even," she confirmed. "Right, even," he muttered. "Not that it really matters now, but there are a couple of things I'd like to say." "Go ahead." "I'm listening," she said, crossing her arms. "I was at a conference all of last week. Jerry wasn't even there. He got fired from the band 2 months ago for having an affair with the receptionist at the office. I haven't seen or spoken to him since then. I was a keynote speaker at that conference. I sat at a table on stage from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. The whole thing was recorded on video. After the sessions, the group met until midnight to discuss the next day's agenda. I have countless witnesses who can vouch for where I was and what I was doing. I didn't leave the hotel until I headed to the airport once it was over." "So you're denying it outright?" she asked, eyes narrowing. That's exactly what I'm doing. But of course, you don't believe me, he said, shaking his head. No, I don't believe you, she snapped. Obviously. I've got proof, recordings, witnesses, and documentation of my whereabouts the whole time. All you've got is a phone call from someone who wasn't even there. Not exactly a rock-solid case, is it? He replied, his tone cutting. But I believe her, she insisted stubbornly. Belief doesn't make something a fact, Sarah. I believed I was married to the most wonderful, loving woman in the world. But what I learned last Sunday was that I'm actually married to a cold, vindictive person who had no problem humiliating me, both physically and emotionally, without any real proof of wrongdoing. Sarah remained silent, offering no response. I'm leaving now. My attorney will be in touch within the next few days, Jake stated calmly. I'm not going to divorce you, she shot back. This was the whole point of all this. Now we're even. Sarah, I didn't cheat on you. Were you even listening? He replied, his voice steady. I'm not a fool. Of course, I listened, she snapped. And you still think what you did was justified? He pressed, his eyes fixed on her. I do, she replied without hesitation. Then there's nothing left for us to discuss, he said coldly. Just do me a favor and call Jill. Find out what kind of evidence she supposedly had. Not that it really matters now. With that, Jake turned and walked out of the house, not sparing another glance back. He headed straight to his hotel room, where he burned the video onto 3 separate DVDs. He had already made an appointment with his lawyer, and later that day, he went to finalize the divorce paperwork. The grounds for filing? Adultery. He handed one of the DVDs to his attorney as evidence, ensuring the prenuptial agreement would hold up in court. When the papers were ready, Jake personally delivered them to Sarah. His attorney had suggested some immediate financial matters to address, so after leaving the lawyer's office, he took care of those as well. He silenced his phone, and when he finally returned to his hotel room, he checked it. The first call from Sarah came just 5 minutes after he'd left the house, followed by radio silence for about 2 hours. Then, calls started coming in roughly every 5 minutes. He listened to only one voicemail, the first one that came after the 2-hour gap. Oh my God, Jake, I finally got through to Jill. She was drunk. Please call me. I made a mistake. Please, call me, her voice sounded frantic. Without a second thought, Jake deleted all of her voicemails and calls, as well as her texts and emails. But the barrage of messages continued. He scanned the incoming numbers, noticing that Sarah's father, mother, and sister had all tried to reach out. Jake decided to call her father, Sam. Hey, Sam, it's Jake, he said calmly. I know who the hell it is. You think I can't read? Now, what the hell did you do to my daughter? Sam barked angrily. I haven't done anything to her, except ignore her calls, Jake replied coolly. Well, damn it. She's hysterical. What's going on? Sam demanded. Sam, if you want to know what happened, you need to talk to Sarah, Jake answered, keeping his tone even. I'm asking you, damn it. Sam's frustration was palpable. You're wasting your breath. Talk to her, Jake insisted, maintaining his composure. Did you cheat on her or something? Sam asked, his voice rising. Talk to Sarah, Jake repeated firmly. You son of a, __. I should come over there and kick your ass. Sam threatened. Sam, listen to me, Jake replied, his patience thinning. If you want to know the truth, you'll have to hear it from Sarah. I'm not discussing this with you, Mary, or anyone else. Go talk to her. You __. You really did cheat on her, didn't you? Sam accused. Goodbye, Sam, Jake said, ending the call. Sam called back almost immediately, but Jake ignored it. Then came a call from her mother, Mary, which he also dismissed, deleting their voicemails without listening. Afterward, he headed out for dinner and returned to his hotel room to spend the night. By Thursday morning, Jake decided to buy a new cell phone, though he kept his old one for reference. At his office, he took an extended vacation and gave them his new number, asking them to keep it private. Then, he went to the far end of town and rented a small, furnished apartment, signing a 6-month lease. He stopped by the grocery store to pick up food and basic supplies. By the end of the day, he had the new place set up and in order. On Friday morning, his lawyer gave him a call. Jake went to the courthouse, signed the necessary papers, and after the filing, was handed a copy to give to Sarah. Though her copy didn't require a signature, the lawyer advised him to make sure there was an impartial witness when she was served. Jake called Sarah, arranging to meet for lunch at one of their regular restaurants. When Sarah arrived, Jake was already seated at a quiet table in the back. She had gone all out, dressed up and made up like she was ready for a special occasion. As she approached, Jake stood up. Sarah wrapped her arms around Jake, trying to kiss him, but he turned his face, offering only his cheek. It was far from the reaction she'd been hoping for, and the disappointment was clear in her eyes. She took a seat at the table across from him. "Jake, I know I messed up. I just want us to put this behind us and move forward," she pleaded. "I couldn't agree more." "It is time to move forward," Jake replied as he waved away the waiter. It was Lynn. They had known her for years. "What can I get you both to drink?" she asked with a warm smile. "2 Diet Cokes," Sarah answered quickly. "Lynn, could you hang around for just a moment?" Jake asked. He reached into his bag, pulled out the divorce papers, and handed them to Sarah. "Sarah, these are the divorce papers. Lynn will serve as my witness that you've officially been notified." "Thanks, Lynn," he added. Sarah's face went pale as she stared down at the documents. Lynn left them to fetch their drinks. "Jake, you said you wanted to put this behind us and move forward," she said, her voice trembling. "That's exactly what I'm doing, Sarah. I'm moving forward," he responded, his tone firm. "But Jake, I made a mistake." "That's not what I meant," she protested. "Sarah, we've been married for over 7 years. Until last Sunday, those were the best years of my life. I've loved you more than I've ever loved anyone, and I doubt I'll ever love someone like that again," he said quietly. "Don't just throw that away, Jake. We have a good marriage," she pleaded, desperation in her eyes. "We had a good marriage. It won't ever be the same now. You shattered it, along with my love, last Sunday," he replied, his voice turning cold. "It was a mistake. Can't you see that?" she cried. "Let me tell you what I see, Sarah, whether I'm looking at you or just closing my eyes," he began. "I see the woman I loved. But now, I see her with him, on that table in front of me, telling me how much she enjoys it and how he's a better lover than I ever was. That's the image burned into my mind now, Sarah. Not the woman I used to care about. You killed her that day." "But Jake, it was just a mistake," she insisted. "No, it was a calculated, deliberate choice. The reason behind it might have been a mistake, but not the act itself," he corrected her. "I told you, if you ever cheated on me, I would have revenge sex in front of you. You knew this, and you even agreed," she shot back defensively. "Yeah, I agreed, knowing it would never come to that," he replied. "What did I say would happen if you cheated on me?" he asked, his eyes boring into hers. Sarah lowered her gaze to the table. "You said you'd divorce me. And did you agree to that?" he pressed. "Yes, but I didn't cheat on you," she muttered. Jake reached into his bag and pulled out a DVD, holding it out to her. "Here, this is for you. It's a copy of your not cheating incident with Joey." "Jake, it wasn't cheating. It was revenge," she snapped. Lynn returned with their drinks and took their lunch orders, sensing the tension but saying nothing. Sarah, sex outside of marriage is adultery. And unless both people in that marriage agree to it, it's cheating, he explained calmly. We can work through this, Jake. We can see a therapist, she suggested desperately. No, Sarah, we can't, he replied, shaking his head. You showed me a side of you that destroyed the woman I once loved. You killed that person, just as surely as if you'd cut out her heart. Only instead of hers, you tore out mine. I don't want a divorce. I'll fight you, she exclaimed. Last Sunday, you revealed a different side of yourself. Well, I have another side too, and trust me, you don't want to see it, he warned. What other side? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. The side that can be just as ruthless, cold, and cruel as you were that day. Unlike you, I won't hide behind the excuse of a mistake. I'll own up to everything I do, he said, his eyes steely. That's not who you are, Jake, and you know it, she shot back, her voice shaking. Funny, he said with a bitter laugh. I was thinking the same thing about you. Damn it, Jake. It was a mistake, she cried out. No, it was a conscious act of revenge, he corrected her. What did you tell your parents? He asked, his tone suddenly shifting. I told them we had a fight, but that we'd work it out, she replied, looking down at the table. A fight about what? He pressed, waiting for her to meet his gaze. But Sarah remained silent, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. About what, Sarah? Jake pressed. I told them you were having an affair, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. So, you never gave them the real story? He asked, his eyes narrowing. No, I didn't. Why not? He demanded. They wouldn't understand, she muttered, avoiding his gaze. Understand what, exactly? He shot back, exasperated. They wouldn't see that it was just a mistake, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Maybe I'm finally starting to get the picture here, Jake said, shaking his head. Sarah, I know what I did hurt you deeply. But what you did was based on judgment, not facts. We can get past this, rebuild our marriage, and leave it behind us. Fine, let's put this marriage behind us then. Because the woman I once loved doesn't exist anymore, he replied coldly. I'm not giving up. I'll fight for us every step of the way, she declared, her eyes blazing. There's nothing left to save, Sarah. It's over, he said flatly. Don't make me show my other side, Jake. You won't like it, she warned. You're bluffing, he replied dismissively. Don't push it, Jake. Get yourself a lawyer. Have them review the petition, and if you've got any questions, have them contact mine. In 90 days, you'll be single, and you can have as much time with Joey as you want, he said, his voice ice cold. This isn't about Joey, she shouted, frustration seeping through her words. I'm sorry. That was out of line, Jake admitted, sighing. I apologize. Jake, I'm not letting you go, she insisted stubbornly. You already have, he responded, his voice quiet but firm. The settlement is more than fair. Just accept it and move on, he added. Not a chance in hell, she snapped. Just then, Lynn came back with their food. Jake handed her his credit card. She walked away, returning shortly with the receipt for him to sign. He scrawled his signature, then stood up, still not having touched his meal. Enjoy your lunch, Sarah. I lost my appetite last Sunday when you spat on me, he said curtly before walking out. Jake headed straight to his house. On Tuesday, Sarah had her first meeting with her lawyer, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Ronnie Savage, recommended by a friend. Please, have a seat, Mrs. Turner. I'm Ronnie Savage. What can I do for you? The lawyer asked as Sarah sat down. My husband is trying to divorce me, Sarah began, her voice shaky. Has he served you with the papers? Ronnie inquired. Yes, he did. Last Friday, Sarah replied, handing over the documents. Ronnie took the papers and glanced at the first page. He's citing adultery. Is that correct? She asked, looking up at Sarah. No, it's not. It was a misunderstanding, Sarah protested. Did you have sex with someone other than your husband? Ronnie asked pointedly. Yes, but it was a mistake, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Did your husband consent to you sleeping with someone else? Ronnie continued, her gaze unwavering. Not with that specific person, but he did agree that I could have revenge sex if he ever cheated on me, Sarah explained. So, you're saying your husband cheated on you, and you had revenge sex? Ronnie clarified. Well, yes, and no, Sarah stammered. Mrs. Turner, could you please explain that a bit more? Ronnie asked, leaning back in her chair. I did have revenge sex, but then I found out he wasn't actually cheating on me, Sarah admitted, her eyes dropping to the floor. So, your husband wasn't cheating, but you still went through with the revenge sex? Ronnie repeated, raising an eyebrow. I did, Sarah confessed, feeling the weight of her actions. Mrs. Turner, that's called adultery, Ronnie stated bluntly. But I thought he was cheating. Sarah argued, her voice rising. What evidence did you have? Ronnie questioned. A friend told me he did, Sarah said, almost whispering. And it turns out your friend was mistaken? Ronnie asked. Yes, Sarah muttered, her face flushing. Well, at least you see now that it was a mistake, Sarah said, hoping for some sympathy. Mrs. Turner, Ronnie began, her tone matter of fact, from what you've told me, I'm dealing with a woman who committed revenge sex based purely on hearsay. Does your husband have any proof that you slept with another man? Yes, Sarah admitted. I handcuffed him to a chair and made him watch. So, it's essentially his word against yours, Ronnie noted. Is there any other evidence? I videotaped the entire thing, Sarah confessed, her voice barely audible. Do you have that video? Ronnie asked. Sarah nodded and handed over the DVD that Jake had given her on Friday. May I watch it? Ronnie asked. Sarah nodded again. Ronnie inserted the DVD into a player, and after just a few minutes, she stopped it. I'll need to go through the whole video later, she said. For now, let me take a closer look at the petition. She began flipping through the pages. After a few minutes of reading, she looked up. I see you signed a prenuptial agreement, and at first glance, it seems pretty solid. If your husband changes the complaint to irreconcilable differences, we can avoid the adultery claim. But that might not be easy. Even with the prenup in place, he's offering you considerably more than what the law requires. Without the prenup, you might be able to get a significantly larger cash settlement. I don't want a cash settlement, and I definitely don't want a divorce. I just want my husband back, Sarah insisted. Did you tell him that? Ronnie asked. Yeah, and he didn't even hesitate to reject it, Sarah admitted, frustration in her voice. Contested divorces can get very costly for everyone involved. If we push for counseling, it certainly can't hurt our case, Ronnie suggested. Then let's do it. We'll propose counseling, and if he refuses, we'll make it clear that we're ready to fight for everything, Sarah replied, her determination building. All right. Do you have any dirt on him? Ronnie inquired. You mean, like criminal stuff? Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. Anything at all, Ronnie clarified. He's as clean as they come. Spotless, Sarah sighed. Has he ever hit you or made threats? Ronnie pressed. No, he's never even raised his voice at me, Sarah replied. I'll go through all the paperwork in detail, watch the video, and then get back to you in a day or two. Does he have a copy of that DVD? Ronnie asked. Sarah nodded. By Wednesday, Ronnie had called her back. Mrs. Turner, your husband has a pretty strong case. The video you recorded is extremely damaging, and you really don't want a judge to see it. Here's what I suggest, let's start with what we discussed earlier. We propose 6 weeks of family counseling. Whatever it takes. I just want my husband back, Sarah agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, Jake's lawyer called and asked him to come into the office. He went that afternoon. Jake, they've requested 6 weeks of couples counseling, his lawyer informed him. And what if I refuse? Jake asked. Then they'll do everything they can to make this a drawn-out battle, the lawyer replied. I'm not on board with it. What's your take? Jake questioned. She hired Ronnie Savage. She's one of the top attorneys out there, his lawyer admitted. Is she better than you? Jake probed. I'm the best there is. You ready for a no-holds-barred fight if it comes to that? The lawyer replied confidently. All right then. Let's decline the counseling and see how they react. Keep me in the loop, Jake decided. That night, Jake called Sarah. Sarah, I'm not going forward with the counseling. I warned you before that if you pushed me on this, you'd see a side of me you wouldn't like, he stated firmly. Why are you acting like this, Jake? Just drop this ridiculous divorce and come home, Sarah pleaded, her voice strained. It's not happening, Sarah. This is your final chance to take the easy way out. I won't be calling you again. I'm ready to fight, he replied coldly. Jake, I don't want a divorce, she cried. Then have it your way, he said, ending the call. The following Monday, Sarah filed a countersuit, citing irreconcilable differences as the grounds. She demanded everything in the settlement. 2 days later, the local school board and the school where Sarah worked were served with documents alleging an inappropriate relationship between their 2 married teachers, Sarah Turner and Joseph Carr. The package included graphic photos of them together. A closed-door emergency school board meeting was called, and both were fired on the spot. That same day, Joey's wife, Tammy, received a DVD in the mail, along with the names and phone numbers of those involved. She called Jake after watching the footage. Hello, this is Jake Turner, he answered. This is Tammy Carr, Joey's wife. Did you send me that DVD? She asked, her voice tense. Yes, ma'am. I'm really sorry, but I thought you deserved to know, Jake replied. When was it filmed? She questioned. About a week ago Sunday, at my place, he explained. And that's you sitting in the chair, she continued. Yes, that's me, he confirmed. And the footage, it's real. Not edited in any way, she pressed. Yes, ma'am, it's completely real, Jake assured her. Is that your wife? Tammy asked. For now, yes. But I've already filed for divorce, Jake stated. That's all I needed to know. Sorry to bother you, Tammy said before hanging up. Her next call was to a divorce attorney. The very next day, Joey called Sarah, furious over the fallout from her act of revenge. She had not only cost him his job but also jeopardized his marriage. Despite losing her job and Joey's call, Sarah refused to back down. A week passed with no communication from Jake or his lawyer, so Jake took his next step. Sarah's parents and sister received copies of the DVD in the mail. After watching the brief but damning footage, they approached Sarah with questions, their anger and disappointment evident. Jake's old cell phone rang, and he saw it was Sarah's sister calling. With a sigh, he answered. How could you, Jake? Sarah loves you. Mandy exclaimed. Mandy, she has a strange way of showing it, Jake replied coldly. It was just revenge sex, for God's sake. Mandy argued. So, she still hasn't told you the whole story, he asked, his voice edged with frustration. Then what exactly is the truth, Jake? She demanded. I wasn't having an affair, Mandy. She got a call from some friend who claimed I was, and she took it as gospel. Without any proof, she decided to get her revenge, he explained. Jake, Sarah's not that stupid, Mandy said, her disbelief clear. Well, why don't you ask her yourself? And while you're at it, tell her this: if she drops the fight and lets the divorce go through, then that'll be the end of it. But if she keeps pushing, this is only the beginning, Jake warned. Can't you just try to work this out? Mandy pleaded. Have you watched the DVD? Jake shot back. Only the beginning. That's as much as I could stomach, she admitted. Watch the entire thing, Mandy. And then ask yourself, if you were in my shoes and your husband was willing to try to reconcile after that, would you go for it? He challenged. Alright, I'll watch it. But I still think you should try to work things out, she insisted. Mandy, you've known me since we were kids. You know I'm not a bad guy. Just watch the DVD, he said firmly. Fine, I will. Mandy hung up, and Jake leaned back, waiting. About an hour later, his phone rang again. Oh, Jake, I'm so sorry. I see the situation now, Mandy began, her voice filled with remorse. But I still need to talk to Sarah. I'll tell her your message: if she stops fighting the divorce, this will all end. If she keeps going, it's only going to get worse. Thanks, Mandy, Jake replied. Mandy went to see Sarah in person, and after hearing Sarah's confirmation of what Jake had said, she relayed his warning. However, Sarah stubbornly refused to back down. Afterward, Mandy went to their parents to explain what Sarah had done and shared Jake's insistence that she drop the countersuit. That evening, Sarah's parents visited her and reviewed both the divorce papers and the prenuptial agreement. Sean, her father, consulted a family friend who was an attorney. The friend's advice was clear: Sarah should do exactly what Jake was asking, let the matter go quietly to divorce court. Still, Sarah stood her ground. Another week passed without any word from Jake's lawyer, so he took the next step. Sarah taught Sunday school at the same church her parents attended. Every member of the women's auxiliary and the church ministers received a flyer in the mail. The flyer featured graphic pictures of Sarah with another man. The caption bluntly asked, "Should this woman be teaching your children on Sunday?" From that moment, Sarah's parents were treated like outcasts in their own church. After the Sunday service, the pastor pulled them aside for a private conversation. He explained why they had been shunned and handed them a letter addressed to Sarah. The letter informed her that her services would no longer be needed and that she was no longer welcome in the church. Enclosed was a copy of the flyer. When her parents gave it to her, Sarah broke down in tears but still refused to drop her counterclaim. She immediately informed her lawyer, Ronnie, about Jake's actions. However, Ronnie pointed out that showing the video to her family wasn't illegal. On the DVD, Sarah had clearly stated that she made the tape for Jake, making it his property. He was free to share it with any adult. The flyers had been sent anonymously, so without a proper investigation, they couldn't be directly linked to Jake. Ronnie strongly recommended that Sarah drop her countersuit. Even Sarah's family begged her to let it go, as it was now affecting their lives as well. Sean eventually called Jake, voicing his concerns. Jake calmly repeated his demand: Sarah needed to drop the counterclaim. Still, she refused to relent. A few days later, Sarah's neighbors and all their friends received similar flyers, this time with Sarah's name and contact details prominently displayed. Her phone and email were bombarded with nuisance calls and messages. Trash was dumped on her car, her driveway, and across her lawn. Jake waited another week before making his next move, posting on her social media accounts. He began with suggestive innuendos, gradually escalating to photos with strategically placed blackouts. Not long after, Sarah received an email from a porn site, thanking her for the video submission. The situation reached a breaking point when a news crew showed up at her front door. That was when Sarah finally called her lawyer and agreed to withdraw the countersuit. She requested a face-to-face meeting with Jake, who agreed, on the condition that it take place at his attorney's office. They met a few days later. When Sarah walked into the room, she looked like a shell of her former self. She had lost weight and appeared utterly exhausted, as though sleep had evaded her for days. "Sarah," Jake said, sitting down across the table from her. "I withdrew the countersuit. You got what you wanted." "No, Sarah, I didn't win," he replied. "I lost. I lost the woman I loved, I lost our marriage, and I lost everything that ever meant anything to me." "There really is a side of you I'd never seen before," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry you had to bring it out." "Sarah, I don't know what to say," she began, looking down. "I can't show my face anywhere. I'd have to leave town just to find a job." "Neither can I stay here," he replied. "Everyone we know treats me like a pariah too. In the end, we both lost everything, didn't we?" "Yeah, Jake, we did," he said, his eyes misting with tears. "I know it's too late now," she whispered, "but is there anything I can do to make this right? Other than figuring out how to turn back time?" "Other than that, I don't think so, Sarah," he answered, standing up, preparing to leave. Sarah stood as well, holding out her arms for one last embrace, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Jake took a step toward her, then paused, his own tears threatening to spill over. "I can't, Sarah," he said, his voice breaking. "It would feel like I was betraying the woman I used to love." He stood there for a moment, staring at her, then turned and headed for the door. With his hand on the doorknob, he glanced back at her one final time. "There is one thing that might help," he said quietly. "What is it, Jake?" she asked, barely able to speak. "You could say, 'I'm sorry.'" "Just once," he replied. And with that, Jake walked out of the office and out of her life.